I hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. And in the US, it is a holiday. So there wasn't a ton of Cardano news out there today, but there are a few items to discuss. And some of them have to do with stablecoins. If you are not particularly concerned about stablecoin news and you just want to know when your bags are going to be pumped enough to buy your own moon elephant, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, thank you for jumping on. It was kind of a slow news today. There wasn't a huge amount going on. Part of that was, at least in the Cardano world, there wasn't a huge amount going on. Part of that was because it was a holiday in the US, so a lot of businesses were closed. Obviously, the federal government is closed, so there just weren't a huge amount of things going on. For Runa 93 says I've caught AOS live. Yeah, this was very short notice too, so I appreciate you jumping on. Hey Daniil, how's it going? Hey Matthew, thanks for jumping on. Thank you everybody for jumping on. So there were a few items today though, a few news items. I won't even call them news items. I'll just call them things that came up that I think are worthy of noticing at least. So some of them have to do with stable coins. It seems like there's a lot of talk right now around stable coins, just sort of generally. There's a lot of things going on in our ecosystem, in every ecosystem. And I think stable coins are going to be a pretty hot topic for probably the foreseeable future. It's going to be a lot of the discussion, especially on the political and regulatory side, because that's one of the biggest things everybody in government's worried about. But the first item that came up today with regard to stablecoins, or came up this weekend anyways, I'll say, was this, which wasn't really government related. So here we have a poster, a well-known personality posting this. Charles Hoskinson congratulates Cardano's stablecoin JED for only depegging for 5 hours. So obviously, this is the kind of thing we see out of a lot of the rest of the crypto space. In regard to Cardano, we see this kind of thing all the time. They take, some video where Charles or somebody in in Cardano, yep, I called him a YouTube guy. That's right. Charles or somebody in Cardano says something, and it's part of like, a 45-minute discussion of the topic. They take this one little tiny bite, this one little tiny sliver of the discussion with no nuance, and then they run with it like this. So of course, I've called Charles the chief man in hype of Cardano. I love him being that because he's the first one to say things like this. You continue to be trash. Thanks for keeping it real. I love Charles because he gets after it like that. I like it. I like it because he gets after it. Whenever anybody gets after him, he gets after them. So some people hate this. Some people hate him for it, but I like it that he's willing to go toe to toe with anybody who does something like this to him. And part of the reason, obviously, we've known this for years. Part of the reason that they do this is because they know he'll respond. You don't notice people doing this as much with some other personalities in crypto who kind of just stay up in their ivory tower and aren't going to get into fights with people, aren't going to respond to insults, aren't going to respond to criticism. There are well-known personalities in crypto that just kind of hang out, that don't really involve themselves in the day-to-day, on the ground, in the trenches, social media, x.com warfare like Charles. But they know Charles will. So they are more than happy to go after him because they know that's going to produce some passion. See here, this original post has 222 likes, 19,000 views. Charles made his response, 180 likes. I mean, they know what's going to happen. They know they're going to get a rise out of Charles, and they're going to get more exposure. They're going to do more click farming via targeting Charles as opposed to certain other personalities, almost any other personality really in crypto. So the interesting thing about this is the actual merits of the concept of the post, though. So he's basically saying, hey, Jed, I mean, the implication here is that Jed depegged for 5 hours. But there's a little bit more nuance. There's a little bit more nuance to this. So Riley says, Riley says, Jed didn't depeg at all. The protocol accepted Jed in return for $1 minus fees the entire time, just as it is designed to. Lots of misleading BS in all ecosystems right now. I can't tell if the BS is coming from idiocy or lies. Here we have Phil saying Jed never depegged. It was trading exactly $1 of ADA for the entire duration of the market crash via the Jed protocol. And of course, they both have a very good point. The point is that you might have a stablecoin that's, being traded on various AMM dexes. And, it's not really, I mean, conceptually, this is an oversimplification, but conceptually, it's kind of the same as if I was personally out there acting as some kind of a very, very low level amateurish. I'm not saying these dexes are amateurish, but I'm saying, imagine if I was being some kind of very amateurish market maker myself, just personally as a guy on X. And I was saying like, hey, I'll trade you for Jed. Do you have Jed and you want to trade it for dollars of ADA? Go ahead. I'll be your market maker. I'm an independent party. I'm not a part of the Jed protocol. I'm not I'm not somebody at Coty who is actually responsible for the Jed protocol. So I could have liquidity problems, right? All of a sudden I could say, oh, I don't want to give you $1 worth of ADA for your Jed. I'll only give you 75 cents worth of ADA for your Jed if you want it. That's the trade I'm willing to make right now. That's not really a shortcoming or a depegging of the Jed protocol. That's just me having liquidity issues or just not being a good trading partner, not being the kind of trading partner you'd want to trade your Jed with. That's kind of how I look at these dexes. When some dex has some kind of a liquidity problem or some kind of a malfunction, a glitch, whatever we want to blame it on, and they're not willing to trade stable coins at the actual price. Usually we have arbitrage taking care of this. People who see the wrong price on that in that market for the stable coin are going to trade against other markets. They're going to buy or sell another market to take advantage of that delta in the price. That's the way it's supposed to work. But if there's not enough liquidity, if there's not enough people going back and forth between these different players, say nobody is willing to come to me and say, oh, you're only buying it at 75 cents, or you're selling it too high, you're buying too low, whatever it is. If somebody's not willing to come around and make a profit on that delta in the price and my poor pricing of the stable coin, then it's never going to be corrected. And actually, if I'm just an individual doing this on an amateur level, this is just a thought experiment, right? It's not an actual example of something that could happen. But if I'm just doing this on an amateur level, I'm an independent actor, I might not be willing to change my price. That's if I were just a human being. I might say, I'm only willing to give you 75 cents. But if I'm an AMM and if I'm a DEX and there's some kind of a problem in that pool, some kind of a liquidity problem, it's not really, the point I'm trying to make is it's not really a Jed protocol that depegged. It's just that there's some problem with this DEX's market for that stablecoin. And that's what both Riley and Phil are pointing out here. This is something we see with stablecoins and sort of crypto assets at large. We talked about this weekend, but we obviously had this gigantic flash crash on Friday. And it was actually more exacerbated back in the day, because back in the day, you'd have these flash crashes and the prices would be, if you can imagine, if this is your first cycle, the first time you've ever seen a flash crash, the prices would be even more wildly all over the place. And people actually could, theoretically, if the centralized exchanges were working, people could actually trade across those centralized exchanges and make a little bit of money for some amount of time if they could get their trades to execute. It's actually gotten better, if you can believe it. Like this flash crash compared to the ones we used to see back in the old days since I've been in, since that 2012, 2013, 2014 period. The flash crash we saw Friday was actually kind of civilized and orderly. I know that sounds wild because the charts look so crazy, but this is actually not that bad compared to what we used to see, because we'd have flash crashes back in the day and the prices were all over the place. Nobody knew what the price was supposed to be. I mean, in the early days, we didn't even have something like CMC, that was sort of like this consensus place that everybody looked for pricing. I know some of you probably don't love CMC, but let's face it, it is the consensus place that a lot of people look for pricing. So I'm not saying it's the same as the oracles that are relied on in various ecosystems, but your casual person in retail, a lot of people go to CMC. We didn't have that back in the day, and the prices would be all over the place. It'd be much crazier than this. This recovery, while it's being characterized in this post here as 5 hours of depegging, really what we saw is the JED protocol. According to all accounts, I didn't go back and forensically look at the history of pricing in the JED protocol, but by all accounts, the JED protocol worked perfectly. It sold in exactly the same range it's always sold in. And there were a bunch of DEXs, a bunch of markets in various DEXs that possibly had liquidity problems. But I think it's actually unfair to start from this premise that there was a depegging for 5 hours. What you had was, sort of a mispricing of the asset in a bunch of DEXs. Apparently, that's what he's queuing off here. But if somebody had been quick enough and trades had executed on a timely enough basis, obviously arbitrage between the actual JED protocol and those DEXs would have solved the problem in short order. And actually, we see in 5 hours, this problem with these DEXs was over. So this is really a problem. What's being described here is a problem with those DEXs, those markets, those DEXs, and not the actual JED protocol. So let's see. The Cardano Foundation said they have a tier 1 stable in the pipeline. Do you think it even eventuates? And if so, which stable coin is your guess? I don't know. Who knows? I think they would take any stable coin. So it could be any tier 1. If they say it's a tier 1, it could be any tier 1 stable coin. They're not going to turn down any tier 1 stable coin. What your definition of a tier 1 stable coin includes, is it just USDC, Tether? What's the other one? Athena. I never know how to pronounce that. Athena. Is it those three? Is it something else? I guess it goes down to, your definition of a tier 1 stablecoin. I think it could be any one of the three. We probably won't know until it's actually announced. Does USDC seem in love with us? No. I mean, Coinbase wasn't the first centralized exchange on the Cardano bus. They were not the first one to trade Cardano. And Coinbase certainly is sort of, as we've discussed in recent episodes, Coinbase was certainly, involved in USDC. So, might not be USDC, but this actually, I think, goes to one of the bigger themes we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll come back to this in just a second. Skip Skipperton. Hey, AOS family. Hey, Skip. Thanks for dropping by. Tiwowo. Thank you for dropping by. I have liquidity problems when I watch Sunday Night Football. I usually have a golden spot. I'm from Kansas City. Okay. I so sick of the new stable coins. Good morning, Dr. SJ Lazar. Can't we just buy USDC, then develop ADA stablecoins? The revenue numbers and DPS statistics are troublesome. I've been supportive for multiple years. This is taking way too freaking long. So yeah, I mean, one of the things we need to think about, I think, so that we don't disappoint ourselves on the tail end of this sort of stablecoin side quest we're on. I'm going to call it a side quest. That'll probably offend some people, but I'm going to call it a side quest. Mission Zambia. Thank you. Thank you for jumping on again. I appreciate it. At the tail end of this side quest, though, I don't think we want to think of stable coins as some kind of cure-all. because it's not unreasonable for people to argue we have a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem. The perceived chicken and egg problem here is that we don't there's not enough demand for DeFi platforms because we don't have a tier one stablecoin, and we don't have a tier one stablecoin because there's not enough demand for use of Cardano DeFi platforms. I'm just saying that's the perceived chicken and egg problem. I don't even know how true that is. What I'm trying to temper everybody's expectations, because even if we get a tier one stablecoin, it's possible. And I think Seth just got to the TLDR here. We need users, period. I think that's right. I think it's possible that, we get a tier one stablecoin and it massively helps out, and all of a sudden, all the gears are greased and all those things become much simpler, and we start seeing some progress. I think it's also possible we get a tier one stablecoin and we don't see the kind of impact a lot of people hope for. I think both those things are possible. So let's look at this. And I think this next item might end up having a lot to do with where things go in terms of stablecoins, and even a lot of DeFi. So this is another Charles post. It says, as predicted, the Circle Tether monopoly will soon break. And he is quoting a post from CoinWaft that says, just in 10 major global banks, including Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, Santander, Barclays, TD Bank, MUFG, UBS, and Citi, are joining forces to develop a unified stablecoin initiative. So this is something we've talked about. This is something we've talked about a little bit in the past. Oh, here's hey Crunchy Cat. Yeah, go. I made a big post. I made a big post about this on X. Just go to my X account, which is at Army Spies, and I think it's the most recent post on my account is a big post addressing that. But the problem, we're sort of reaching this this point in the near future. It's sort of like the it's sort of like the event horizon we can't see past, and that's these gigantic institutions coming into crypto. And I think I've described this in the past as possibly having two different prongs, that being the giant tech companies coming in and with all their users, and the giant Wall Street institutions coming in with all their users and all their money. Tech companies have money too, but I think, financial institutions, their biggest tool is their money, and they also have users. Whereas I think, the tech space, they have this gigantic amount of users and they also have money. So once they come in and they have their own stable coin, how is that going to look versus the tier one stable coins? Are the tier one stable? This is kind of like the Lunar founder thing when he was insulting people and making everyone hate him by saying things like, your size is not size. I feel like these big Wall Street institutions, they might do a hold my beer, your size is not size thing on the tier one stable coins, because if all of a sudden we see Goldman, Citi, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, UBS, all of these institutions, if all of their customers, if they make a stable coin of their own, who knows what they'll call it, probably some weird name that some consulting company will come up with, like Aero Stable or something like that. Like if they make their special stable coin available instantly in the accounts of all their customers, that's the real tier one stable coin. Like USDC, Tether, all these other stable coins, they'll always be important to us in crypto, but will those actually be the tier one stable coins anymore? That's a huge question. Thomas Kirkpatrick, hey, how's it going? Do you think if ADA doesn't surpass previous all-time highs, significant interest would leave the ecosystem, leaving a potential slow heat death of the protocol? No, I don't think so, because Cardano has always sort of been the underdog. we've always kind of been like hated by a lot of other people in the crypto space. I think if we don't see new highs this cycle, which is very possible. I think all of these things are totally possible. If we don't see all-time highs this cycle, a lot of people are going to be pretty disappointed, and sure, some people will leave, but our Charles, the Cardano Foundation, Emergo, are they just going to keep trucking along? Probably. I think they're just going to keep doing exactly what they've been doing, and a lot of the developers, are just going to keep doing what they've always done. Sure, we'd see some flee to other ecosystems, but I think everybody's going to keep doing what they're doing, and it doesn't really change any of the fundamentals of the tech that now forms the foundation of Cardano. So I don't think a lot changes, because our promise has always been on the tech front that our foundational architecture is superior. That's always been the promise of Cardano. That's been the thesis, that the tech underlying Cardano is a better compromise of the blockchain trilemma. That's always sort of been the bet. So I don't think that changes, even if we don't reach all-time highs. It's just sort of a timing issue. I made that video a couple days ago called Cardano and time risk, and I think that's the time risk right there. Aram, how's it going? Thank you for joining. Vincent 2 2099. Hey Adam, it's a bit late for me, but I'll stay around for a bit. Are you talking to Adam Olson, maybe? Adam up there? Bank USD. That seems like as good a guess as any. I don't know if that's a guess or if that's actually a name, but that's a great guess. Maybe they wouldn't want that. Maybe they actually wouldn't want that. Crunchy Cat says, I saw the post. I'm still on the fence, but see your point. Is this going to be our homegrown stables, or is it allowed to go to make partnerships with the real tier ones? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions on how Cardano should even approach stables. One of the fundamental questions is, do we go to our homegrown stable coins like Moneta, or do we go to the tier ones? Or do we do both? I think the reasonable answer is probably we do both. I think people aren't going to object if we can get a tier one stable coin, and I think at the same time it makes sense to grow our homegrown stable coins. This is a very good point. Very good point from Aram here. I believe if Bitcoin DeFi is on Cardano, it will pass ETH's market cap. I like the sounds of that. I mean, that is the reason why Bitcoin DeFi on Cardano was so attractive. And I mean, I don't think it was lost on most of us when we realized that Cardano was extended UTXO and nobody else, very few ecosystems aside from Bitcoin and a couple of other small ones were UTXO. And none with, of course, the level of expressiveness, the level of programmability of Cardano. Back in the early days, that was, part of the thesis of Cardano. One day down the road, it's going to be useful that we are also UTXO like Bitcoin. And this is sort of the fruition of all that. I think it's a really big deal. Crunchy Cat, we need to address the elephant in the room. Literally all of us are bag holders losing faith. So I definitely understand the tendency that underlies that. However, my perception of that is heavily tempered by the fact that I've seen it every single cycle. Every single cycle, no matter what ecosystem, crypto is very volatile, and whenever an ecosystem is not doing good, even if it did great in some other part of that cycle, everybody lost faith inside that ecosystem. That meant that some people sold, some people didn't. That's up to each person. But it really depends on sort of where you started in Cardano. Like if you bought all your Cardano at $3.10 or whatever at the top of the last cycle, it would be very hard to not lose faith. But if you were DCAing in 2018 like I was, and you've already seen, you were buying Cardano, you were buying ADA at under 3 cents, and now Cardano is up in the 70-cent range, it's a different perspective. But I really, every cycle in every ecosystem I've ever watched, originally that was Bitcoin, and then it was kind of Ethereum, and now it's Cardano. And, there have been a bunch of others sort of in between. In every ecosystem, though, I've felt bad every cycle. you know, anytime anybody goes through this like transformation where they really believe that something is going to be beneficial to them, and then it turns out to not be so beneficial, they lose money, or they sell early, or it just dies. We've seen a lot of cryptocurrencies die. I mean, I still remember back in the day, so many people talked to me about EOS after they did their $4 billion ICO, which was unheard of at the time. It was incredible that they did. I believe it was like 4 billion. It was the biggest ICO ever at the time, and everybody believed EOS was going to be the future. I read their, whatever they had out there. I think they had a white paper, and they might have had a special paper on governance. I read all their stuff, and everybody was telling me that EOS was going to destroy everyone and everything. And I read it, and I immediately knew their governance was not going to work, because it had this weird quasi-judicial system and kind of these mediators. And I could just instantly tell it was too grandiose, too ambitious, wasn't going to work. And, the EOS ecosystem, nobody's talking about it anymore. So I really feel bad for people like that who bought into a $4 billion ICO, and then the whole ecosystem just kind of imploded. I really feel bad for people like that. I feel bad for anybody in this cycle who, might have bought at the top, or in any ecosystem in any cycle, who bought at the top and then waits 4 years. And this cycle is especially brutal because now we find ourselves in October of year 4 of the cycle, and we're still nowhere near all-time highs. Crypto is volatile, and none of us would probably be here if crypto wasn't so volatile. If crypto wasn't so volatile, the rewards also would be commensurate with the lack of volatility. I think we're all here. A lot of us are here because of the volatility, and sometimes it goes in the direction you don't want it to, which is unfortunate. So, Get Me Hop says, currently watching while working in China. It's lunchtime here, so an easy watch. Thank you for your videos. Glad you're back. Yeah, glad to be back. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Says, yeah, we've been told that for about 1 year. The truth is BTC DeFi will be on multiple chains, and BTC Layer 1 is now creating DeFi apps on its lonesome. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It could be that BTC DeFi doesn't turn out to be, the Cardano advantage that we think it's going to be. That's certainly possible. Crypto's wild. Almost anything can happen in crypto. So I think those things are possible, but it definitely looks like we have a good chance because of the UTXO thing. I mean, if you can explain to me how, I have yet to see any kind of persuasive explanation that anybody can do it as well as we can. So, we'll see if that turns out not to be true. It could be that, the programming languages that are prevalent in other ecosystems turn out to be an advantage that overwhelms even our shared UTXO underpinnings. That's possible. It's crypto. It's wild. Anything could happen. Like, I'm a strong believer in Cardano, so I'm shocked that Cardano isn't bigger than it is right now. But, the truth is that being too early is indistinguishable from being wrong. So in Cardano, I tend to think that, a lot of times we're probably just too early on a lot of things in Cardano. But the UTXO thing is big. And here's a post from Aram, which kind of goes in that same direction. Patience is key with Cardano. I think that's true. Okay, let's see what else we got. Yeah, this is kind of how I feel too for running 93. I'm not losing faith. Stablecoins are not the end all be all of a layer 1 project. As long as they're growing in some way, we're going to be fine. Yeah, I'm kind of glad. Like, I probably wouldn't be as interested in Cardano if Cardano was just about DeFi and stablecoins and TVL. If the only metric we cared about was TVL, I probably wouldn't care about Cardano, to be honest. Because I've made whole videos about this, but I'm interested in total value liberated. I'm interested in freedom, not in locking myself. Like, definitely. I think this is probably true of all humans, but I think at some point in our ancestry, we've all had ancestors who were locked up. That is not the direction I'm trying to go in. I'm trying to go in the direction of maximum freedom, not locking. Do you know if the new Cardano educational program that CF brought up on Binance is available in the US? I don't know. I've seen kind of some Cardano educational programs in the past. This seems to be a new one. I think I knew about one that I believe maybe Emergo was behind um, in the past. I don't know if I really know about this CF program. Waiting on Midnight's Gong Lieb. Waiting on Midnight's. Yeah, I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see what the price of the night tokens are. That'd be interesting. Corny G, thank you for joining. Good to see you. Okay, let's see. Thomas Kirkpatrick. People keep that bigger because the potential in most cases, though, death of 4-year cycles or Cardano others not reaching all-time high again after waiting so long would become a giant deterrent. Yeah, I mean, things would change. Things would change. In crypto, the narrative is that we have this 4-year cycle and we've seen exponential growth. The history of that 4-year cycle has involved exponential growth. So if that no longer becomes the truth for either crypto as a whole or Cardano as a whole, it changes. The narrative changes, and I think we can all sort of imagine a future where that does change. At some point in the future, it changes, and then it becomes a question of perspective. It's like I said, I started buying in 2018 under 3 cents. So for me, this is all some dreamland stuff from back then. If you asked me in 2018, like you know, in 7 years, would you be disappointed if Cardano is up in the 70-cent range? When I was buying at 2.8 cents or whatever it was, no, I would not ever imagine that I'd be disappointed. So let's say Cardano becomes, and crypto as a whole, let's say the 4-year cycle dies, and instead of all this exponential, crazy parabolic high stuff, we've been seeing this crazy exponential growth. All of a sudden, we start seeing growth that looks more like it's so weird to say these numbers, but like 20% per year, which would be a great return in the equities markets. If you're getting 20% a year, you are doing it just fine in the regular stock market. In crypto, that'd be a huge disappointment to us. If we're only seeing 20% per year, that'd be a huge disappointment. And I think it's reasonable to expect that at some point in the future that does happen to crypto. And that's a really nuanced and involved conversation. A lot of it has to do with how much money printing the world's central banks do, because obviously if they keep printing money at the pace they have been, then maybe we don't have to ever confront that possibility. And I know you're talking about something different. You're talking about Cardano not reaching the all-time high, so not seeing growth over that previous above $3 figure. I think it just depends on your starting point. If you started at 70 cents and it goes up to $1.50, you're probably pretty happy. If you started at 3 cents and it goes up to $1.50, you're probably very happy. Not as happy as if it had just gone to 3. It was, I remember, 4 billion. Oh yeah, the EOS ICO was 4 billion. Yeah, I think that's true, Seth. I think it is a frustrating cycle for alts, especially Friday. Yep, EOS and IOTA. Those were kind of the golden years of ICOs back in those days. My Bitcoin is stuck in a DeFi protocol that's ranked in the 2000s. Learn by lesson, hard lesson to swallow. Yeah, no, I mean, you are not the only one. I think there's a lot of people out there that have their crypto assets locked somewhere where they would not lock them again. I think that is a common story in crypto. Yeah, I think that's a common story in crypto. Here's another news item. I thought this is a news item. I swear we've seen this news item and its reversal a million times. Famously, JP Morgan Chase has made it very hard, in the past. Some of you who are new to crypto might even debate that this might seem hard to believe, but back in the day, there were a lot of reports online of people's Chase accounts being closed just because they were trading with like Coinbase. It wasn't even the super sketchy trading they were doing, just like trading with Coinbase when Chase would, presumably when Chase would see that you were trading with crypto, all these people would report, hey, I used my Chase account that I've had for, X number of years. I used it with Coinbase the other day, and now they're telling me they're closing my account. Those were the kind of reports you saw a lot in the past with Chase. And of course, Jamie Dimon, who we see here in this image, famously an early crypto hater. It was hard to say who hated crypto more, Jamie Dimon, Warren Buffett, or Charlie Munger. I don't know which of those three hated crypto more. They are all, now older men with white hair. So there's a little bit of a generational gap there. I think it'd be a lot harder for the Jamie Dimon of a much younger generation to hate crypto with so much vigor. But yeah, famously, he's a famous crypto hater for sure. And Chase as an institution has not been very friendly to crypto, but now they're saying JP Morgan confirms on CNBC that they will allow clients to trade Bitcoin and crypto next year. I've seen them sort of go back and forth on crypto, never at an institutional level like this, though. I've never seen them say, we will allow our clients to trade crypto. So anyways, fingers crossed. I hope this is the case. Seth, me too. I like UTXO. UTXO is great. What's your thoughts on the A to B BTC chart? Need them Fibonaccios? Yeah, I think you already know, Crunchy Cat. I got no Fibonaccios. I am unlike your average bowling alley. I have none of those delightful, cheesy, artificial, corn chips smothered in this artificial sauce. I have none of it. But most of crypto YouTube is Fibonaccios. I would almost argue that most of crypto YouTube embraces Fibonaccios to some extent. So most creators do at least a little Fibonacci, I think. Blue Mammal, this is a good point. Fundamentals do take time. I was in so I was a student during the dot-com crash, and I'll never forget it. It was such a big deal because the valuations were so crazy. I mean, everybody knows the story. Pets.com had this insane valuation. And I remember to have these conversations with people, and we were all, sort of awestruck by how great the internet was. But there wasn't like an obvious revenue model for a lot of these websites that had these crazy valuations. And so I just like innocently, again, I was a young student at this time. I was like innocently, whenever this topic would come up, I'd innocently ask my classmates like, what is the revenue model though? How are they going to make money? And people would be like, it doesn't even matter. Just look at how many people are talking about, X website, whatever website was a part of the conversation at the time. And all of a sudden everything crashed. The tech bubble burst, and all of a sudden everything was dead. So it turned out that the fundamental advantages of the internet over brick and mortar and traditional commerce, the fundamental advantages were so obvious even then. It was so obvious that it should have been so obvious to everybody. But as soon as that crash happened, everybody was like, the internet sucks. There's no way to make money. I can't believe everybody believed that. Everybody just assumed that things would kind of go back to normal and it was going to be brick and mortar. And this was just, a flash in the pan kind of thing, because fundamentals take time. In fact, we all know how the story actually went. The internet overtook everything, even something as seemingly brick and mortar susceptible as book sales. Book sales turned out to be a great use case for a little company called Amazon. And everything else, almost everything else that, could possibly be done over the internet was done better over the internet than it was by traditional commerce. At least, depending on your perspective. And there's some people out there who are saying, I hate the internet. I wish we could go back to that brick and mortar world. And there's some like human connections reasons for believing that. I think there's some legitimate valid arguments on that side about human connectivity. But as far as efficiency, in terms of the actual commerce, the internet turned out to be better, in all parts of the economy, basically. And we couldn't see it during the dot-com crash because of what Blue Mammal said here. Fundamentals take time. Yeah, Seth, I agree. I also got into ADA because of the decentralization and security. I also thought people would care more about it than they do. The blockchains that have forsaken decentralization are basically an abomination to me. But I also understand that people love to gamble on things like PFP, NFTs, and meme coins. People love to gamble. So, I mean, to me, that explains why people are so happy to give up on decentralization, because they love to gamble, right? It's like there is no decentralization at the casino. If you go to a casino in Vegas, expect no decentralization. So the same people, the same dopamine reaction to gambling you get when you use those non-decentralized blockchains to do things like in the last cycle, PFP, NFT drops, or, meme coin gambling in this cycle, that dopamine registers in your brain regardless of the decentralization. I think this is true. I think most people would be happy with 2x each month. Rockstar, thank you. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. Okay. Is there a way to set up a night dust mechanism on Cardano to encourage use and storage? So Midnight is doing a lot of things. Midnight has got, a pretty well thought out ecosystem. Maybe just go into a little more detail, Wade, about what you're thinking of here. Like what kind of use and storage are you thinking about? Mission Zambia says, I think Cardano losing the cycle is because the chain funds its own growth through catalysts and treasury grants. There are no external sources of funds, VCs paying our builders. Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be an advantage. If we had a lot of VC money in Cardano, if we had a lot of institutional money in Cardano paying our builders, that would certainly help. A little bit of it, I mean, in that sense, it almost looks a lot more like a first mover advantage thing. It's like Ethereum was first to smart contracts. Solana was first to, maybe I won't call out Solana specifically, but we'll say other blockchains were first to, sacrifice decentralization for scaling and just do the whole, crypto asset casino thing, with massive speed and capacity and, completely give up decentralization. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, what first mover advantage does Cardano have? And it turns out we were sort of first to this particular compromise of the blockchain trilemma, preserving decentralization, having self-custodied staking. And I think the self-custodied staking thing and the way everything works on Cardano, I almost at this point, I mean, that's obviously not an advantage to the person who just wants to walk into the centralized casino and have those dopamine buttons pushed. People are more than willing to pay for that. We know that because Vegas exists. We know that people will pay a gigantic amount of money in the aggregate. Humans will pay a gigantic amount of money to have those dopamine buttons pushed. And right now, that's one of the biggest use cases in crypto. But when we're talking about the real use cases, real world assets, actual big economic players coming into crypto, those are not the things they're going to care about. They're going to care about security, things like that. They might end up having to care about decentralization. Maybe they don't now, maybe they won't want to care about it, but I think, perception might force them to care about it. Maybe that's not going to turn out to be true, but maybe it will. So I think Cardano's advantage in being the first to reach this particular compromise on the blockchain trilemma, it's not an advantage that turns you into a good casino. It's an advantage that turns you into infrastructure for real economic stuff. And the real economic stuff hasn't even hit crypto yet. Did you bought the absolute bottom? Congrats. Yeah, it wasn't any skill or anything on my part. I just I was too I was too hesitant to buy in the 2013 run up. I wasn't quite sold yet. I was watching Cardano. I was aware of Cardano. It was one among many, many blockchains I was kind of looking at, and I didn't buy any in the run up because I didn't like the prices. I didn't really like the prices. And then when everything crashed after that, the end of that cycle and everything crashed, the prices were so low. It was an easy call. There was no skill involved in that decision making. It was super easy. Seth, I was buying ETH at $35. I remember those days. I think the first ETH I bought was at. I did not buy in the ICO. I kind of in retrospect, shortly after that, I wished I had bought it in the ICO because I could have bought it a little cheaper. But I think the first ETH I bought was 72 cents. 72 cents just shortly after the ICO. But actually, I mean, like when prices are in the thousands, it doesn't really matter if you bought at, 72 cents or $5 or $35 or whatever, because it's also low compared to the prices right now. That was part of the beauty of crypto in the early days. BTC at 600 is fantastic. That's a really good buy. I think we should all wait for, this is Ricky Bill 87. I think we should all wait for the Clarity Act to go into law. This will change the market as a whole, including ADA. Patience is the key. Very, very strongly agree with that. The problem right now is the senators on the left of the aisle. The Democratic senators we thought they were going to go along with things. I think a lot of us in crypto hoped that they were just going to go along with the Senate version of the Clarity Act, which would be something that, like Lummis and maybe Gillibrand would put together, or I think everybody's hoping they would just go along with that, like the House Democrats did with the Clarity Act in the House. And, as of last week, we've got this new Democrat version, which makes crypto, they sort of put forward their own version of the bill, which, basically makes all of crypto illegal. That's an oversimplification, but it's that bad. So you probably saw the coverage of that last week, but I think that bill, who is the sponsor of that bill? Maybe Warner. I haven't even, I'm going to sit down and look at it in more detail, but I haven't even looked at it just because every account is that it's so bad. It sounds like it's completely unworkable. Okay. Our builders get paid ADA, which they have to sell to pay bills. We find Cardano development by holding ADA. That's what I think is happening. Yeah, I mean, this has been a problem in crypto since the early days. The first time this came up in crypto was with Bitcoin, because the miners were always having to sell Bitcoin to fund their operations. And it kind of sucked because they were some of the people who were the deepest, the most imbued with sort of the crypto ethos. If you were a Bitcoin miner back in those days, presumably you were pretty sold on Bitcoin. Although there was some pretty big sort of industrial mining going on pretty early in China, and it was, what their motivations were completely unknown to us, sort of in the rest of the world. But yeah, it's always been one of the unfortunate things. The people who are the deepest into crypto and are making a living from crypto often have to sell the crypto they receive, even though they'd be the most likely to believe enough in crypto to hang on to it, to just hodl their crypto. They're also the ones that are making their money from crypto. They're also the ones who are like kind of selling the most, because if they're getting paid in crypto, they got to be selling constantly to, fund their operations and just fund living expenses. J. Marie, thank you for joining. Feel free to join anytime, late, early, whenever. Curly Knox, thank you for joining from New Zealand. Good morning. I think it's probably morning time for you. Okay. Seth's asking Aram a question here. James Syracuse, thank you for joining. Okay. Yes, definitely get to sleep. I think one of the as I've gotten older, I've noticed probably the biggest improvement in my quality of life, like no kidding, counting all things, the biggest improvement in my quality of life was when I started actually getting sleep, which took much longer than it should have. I was definitely a no sleep kind of guy for probably the first, over a third of a century of my life, I was a no sleep guy, and getting the sleep is definitely a huge improvement in quality of life. Not saying this is the case with you. I'm just saying I approve of the sleep. Uh, let's see. Okay. Okay. Forerunner 93 has some feelings about what's going to happen this cycle. So, okay, this is an interesting question from Crunchy Cat. Where is the Clarity Act? So the Clarity Act was the name of the bill passed by the House that the House was good with, but then it had to go to the Senate, and so everybody had high hopes that it would kind of cruise through the Senate because the Republicans have control of the Senate, but they do not have a huge majority, so they need some cooperation from the Democrats. And that would have been fine because the Democrats in the House cooperated, and it was kind of a little bit of a bipartisan thing. There were, it wasn't people didn't vote directly down party lines on the left. So everybody's hoping for the same thing in the Senate, but as of last week, we got this other bill where it wasn't just like a markup, because a markup would be normal. If the Democratic senators had said, "Hey, we're good with where this, directionally we're good with this bill. We want reasonable regulation for crypto. We just want to change a couple of little things, make a couple points here, a red line, just a nice, light red line." Would have been fine and almost expected. Instead, what we got was a complete rewriting of the bill, which was directionally very different. It was sort of like, hey, everybody's a broker dealer. So if one of the worst things in securities law, if you're, part of, if you're running anything that's part of crypto infrastructure, one of the things you would fear the most would be being declared a broker dealer. If you're like, running a wallet or running a DeFi front end, it's like a game over kind of situation if you're declared a broker dealer, because that means what's going to happen is not that, like small time developers, building platforms in their basement. They're not going to like go to the SEC, get licensed as broker dealers and come back in broker dealer slash crypto dev guys. It's going to be the big Wall Street institutions who are going to be like, "Oh, hey, check it out. We're already broker dealers. So now we're your new, blank crypto thing." That's the big fear, and that's basically what this Democratic senator proposal would do. It would require that kind of status, which would basically mean, crypto would just be handed to Wall Street, which I think none of us really want. We're okay for the Wall Street money to come in, but I don't think we want regulation that basically makes it impossible for crypto to keep doing its thing, and all of a sudden anything that crypto wants to do has to be done by Wall Street. Oversimplification, but there you go, 10,000 foot level. Uh, Nobody knows if the top is in. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true all the time. I think all the time, nobody knows where things are going. Um, Nobody really knows what's going to happen. We need a casino on Cardano. I want to play blackjack with my ADA. Cover them trips. Yeah, I mean, it's like the part of the casino thing that I like is just, crypto emulating real life. I like it when crypto can do real life things, but emulating a casino is basically the biggest thing crypto has done. ICOs used to serve that function. ICOs were kind of like the first big casino events, and then PFP NFTs, and now we're back to meme coins. Meme coins have been around for a long, long time. Doge goes way, way back, guys. Doge goes way, way back. But this meme coin casino thing on such a grand scale has definitely been different this cycle. Okay. Okay. Okay, Wade Robinson. Dust needs to be spent, but it will not necessitate sale of. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing about the night system is they've got this dual token system, midnight. I should call it the midnight. ecosystem. They've got this dual token system. We've got the night tokens and we've got dust. And dust is not meant to be this asset that is speculated on and traded here and there. So I think you're talking about dust storage. This is probably a whole discussion that will happen incessantly in Cardano once we actually get the first drop from the glacier drop. There'll probably be like all the discussion in Cardano will probably be about these kinds of issues. And it's an experiment. I mean, this is like a novel mechanism that the gas for the ecosystem is this asset that's not meant to be speculated on. So it's this kind of like novel mechanism. I'm not saying nobody's ever done anything like that in crypto before, but it's kind of a novel way to do it. We've got many examples of, gas tokens that are assets that everybody speculates on and trades, and it kind of like jacks up the price of the transaction fees in a market. So this is kind of I'm glad they went in this new novel direction. It's kind of an experiment. I don't think we'll know how well it works or doesn't work until we've actually got those tokens in our hands and people are actually using the network and using those tokens for gas, basically. Okay, people are talking about Bodega in the comments. Okay. The Layerverse video number 3 hasn't hit yet. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Like, I think that's sort of the direction that we're going with Midnight. Midnight is sort of, we've got a bunch of different proposals that I think would constitute two layers. So if people don't know, I made several videos back in the day about what I described as a Cardano layerverse. And I think this is what all blockchain ecosystems basically become. So you've got a certain compromise on the blockchain trilemma. Sorry, I keep using that phrase, but it's the only way to describe this concept, at least. It's the only good way to describe this concept that I can come up with right now. But you've got this certain compromise of the 3 legs of the blockchain trilemma on the base layer. And in Cardano's case, it is very much not in the direction of scaling. We've gone in the direction of decentralization and security. We don't have the level of speed that something like a Solana has. I think that goes without saying. But you can have many layers on top of that foundational base layer, and you can make whatever compromise you want. You can have a layer that completely forsakes decentralization and just only operates in the interest of scaling. Maybe it even sacrifices security. That's not the one you advertise. That's not the compromise you advertise. But often, that's also the case. You sort of end up sacrificing decentralization, and then you talk about the scaling, but you don't talk about the sacrifices you might have made on the security front. So I think I like. So I don't think I know I like what Cardano has done, making the foundational base layer very, very strong on the decentralization thing. And then you can always add layers later on that are, very, very fast. For instance, Hydra. Hydra is a state channel. You've got less, you can have a state channel that only 2 people are involved in. I'm just speaking of state channels generally here, not commenting particularly on Hydra, but you can have this layer that is basically just a state channel that just you and your transaction partner are involved in. There's not really any decentralization there, but you also don't care about it. So you're having to rely on trust. You can't rely on decentralization. It's not trustless. You're both sort of trusting each other. There's no decentralization there. You could have a state channel like that, and it could be very, very fast. So I think you're right, Adam. I think the Layerverse hasn't hit yet, but I think that's maybe one of all blockchain ecosystems having to go to a layer-verse type system is probably one of the most promising things for Cardano, because Cardano is starting with like this rock solid foundation of decentralization and security. And we can always add those speed layers on top of that. Whereas other ecosystems that started with speed and scaling, they might be outmoded by layers on something like a Cardano that achieve, incomparable speed, and still have that rock solid foundation. Whereas I think like a Solana will never have as much decentralization at the base layer as Cardano does. And, the scaling thing won't matter as much if everybody builds out these very, very speedy layers. That's not even addressing the possibilities in input endorsers that we now call Ouroboros Laos that'll make even our base layer very, very fast. Okay. Woke Upify, thank you for joining from Sweden. I appreciate it. Seth Shepard says he's in Iowa. Okay. This is a good point too. Seth Shepard, government better open them soon or kiss the Clarity Act goodbye for 2025. Yeah, we got to get moving here. We got to get moving. We got to pass that thing, huh? Yeah, if we don't pass the Clarity Act in 2025, that is immeasurably worse than passing it in 2025. I think it's definitely true. Fly over me 7412, much more coming. What do you mean? What do you think much more of what's coming? Just much more beneficial news. Fly over me has a take on this. Dust is going to be very valuable. Wade Robinson, mint necessitate the sell of night. Yeah, we'll have to have. I think we'll have to have like a bigger discussion, sort of about like I said, once we're on the ground in midnight and we can see how the night and dust tokens actually operate. I think once we're on the ground, we'll have a better view of how well it's working. I hope it works really well as they've designed it. But one can think about Cardano, if something's not working well, we're pretty flexible. We're pretty willing to change. Oh, this is nice. This is like an Exhibit quote. I heard you like gambling, so I put a casino in your crypto. That's exactly what happened. Exhibit came by and did his thing on crypto, basically. No, I mean, I don't think so. That's a good question. I can't think of any particular reason. I guess we'll see though, because we sort of expected to get the altcoin ETFs any day now. So I guess if we don't see the altcoin ETFs, then I think we'll have to say that it did have the potential to delay the altcoin ETFs. But I mean, the altcoin ETFs are definitely sort of scheduled to arrive any day now. I think everybody's waiting, but yeah, this Clarity Act thing in the Senate is definitely putting a damper on a lot of things. It's putting a lot of things into question. Evening, Engineer Prepper. Thank you for joining. Uncle Thanos. Yeah. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. This is my understanding as well. Dust is not transferable. One can only use it to pay fees on midnight. That's my understanding. It has to be non-transferable if it's not going to be an asset subject to speculation, basically. So, okay. Yep, Boss is trying to bridge BTC DeFi to ADA. True. Yeah, these are my feelings. Mission Zambia stake pool. These are my feelings exactly. If your blockchain does not give you decentralization, just use AWS or Google Cloud. That is exactly how I feel about it. Crunchy Cat, AOS, you aren't leaving us this run, right? I feel like you'll go ghost in a week or two. Laugh out loud. I mean, it just depends on how sustainable I can make it. Obviously, I was able to emerge from the fiat mines, and I'm very happy not to be down in the depths, in the bowels of the fiat mines. So I will do everything I can to stay out of the fiat mines, but it's difficult to do in crypto. It's difficult to make, being a crypto enthusiast like this channel, it's difficult to make it sustainable. you can make it, I've said this before, you can make it sustainable very easily if you're willing to compromise your principles and extract heavily from, like in this case, the Cardano community. I am definitely pretty rigid in that regard. I'm not willing to do that. And that's why I had to go to the fiat mines last cycle. Like, I could have easily created like a 10,000 PFP collection and sold that thing off. I actually know, I hesitate to even say this. I know of people in Cardano who did that, and the amount of money they told me they walked away with was absurd. I'll just put it that way. I know people who did that, and they were like, "Why don't you do this?" And without offending them, I basically told them I could never do that, and I didn't do it, and I had to go back to the fiat mines. Would I do something like that this cycle? Absolutely not. I would definitely go back to the fiat mines before I would ever do anything like that. So that's the kind of tightrope we're walking here. I'm going to try to make this as sustainable as I can. Obviously, if the Cardano price goes very, very high, then everything gets easier for a bunch of different reasons. There's more people involved. There's a huge rush of interest that makes doing these videos, more sustainable, and also just the ADA price going high makes everything more sustainable. So Seth, I'd rather have the OG ADA users that just talk about the ecosystem. Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so to me, the worst type of hopium is just the Fibonaccios, because it's just a straight manipulation of dopamine. And I get why people love to watch it, because it does push those dopamine buttons. To me, that's the worst type of hopium. People that are just very enthusiastic about their particular ecosystem, who, are like, hey, I'm Mr. Positive Guy. I like to talk about the positive things about my ecosystem. I get those people more. But also, you don't want to, part of the reason I don't give price predictions is because I don't want to convince some people of something that might not turn out to be true. So I think that's a bad type of hopium, and that's often linked to the Fibonacci thing. Yep, exactly. Do you feel like Charles teased us with a SpaceX cameo without anything to show for it? Oh, Truck Dono, very. I've always, of course, guessed from your name that you probably pay a lot of attention to Tesla and SpaceX and X and XAI, just like I do. But yeah, this is something I think about a lot, because I obviously pay a lot of attention to the sort of Elon Musk companies, and I pay a lot of attention to Cardano. So I was probably as excited as everybody when, I think you put it well, when Charles teased us with his SpaceX cameo. And yeah, I think I'm still waiting. I'm glad you brought that up. I'd kind of forgotten about it, as amazing as that is. I'd kind of forgotten about it. I'm still waiting. We should ask Charles. We should ask him. I think if somebody should ask him on his next AMA. Somebody ask him, hey, is there any chance we'll hear anything about the SpaceX cameo? See, I think on Charles AMAs, people ask him questions the wrong way, right? It's like, Charles is a passionate man. He's a passionate and prideful man. So if you want to get a good answer from him, you kind of have to ask the question in a good way. So somebody should ask him, Charles, is there any chance we'll hear something soon about your visit to SpaceX? I would love to hear, I would love to hear his answer to that question. So Crunchy Cat, I don't know yet. So somebody asked me the same question. I've been asked this question many, many times. Somebody asked just last week. So the answer is, we've got to see what it looks like on the ground. I'm the only one involved in this channel. This channel is just me. There's nobody else involved in this channel, but there are 2 other people involved in the stake pool, and they both have, like, high level day jobs. They have very, very serious day jobs and a limited amount of time. And there's a certain cost involved in validating a network. So we'd have to look at, like, what the numbers actually look like. And then, obviously I'm running this channel, and there's another person who spends more time on, the technical side of the stake pool. And these are both people I know in real life, who I've known, since those who were DCAing with me in those 2018 days. I believe, anyways, we were talking about DCAing. I assume they were DCAing at the same time I was, but I believe they were both. Also, I know at least one of them was for sure, but I believe the other person was as well. But anyways, because there's two other people involved and it requires time and a certain economic fit for all of us. Basically, we've got to see what it looks like on the ground. Ooh, I got hurt bad in 2018 on Litecoin. Glad I learned quickly. Yeah, Litecoin was pretty tricky. I remember, I'll never forget. There was this big. I can't even remember what the topic was, but there was a big sort of buy the rumor, sell the news event in Litecoin really early on. And I remember I was so excited about this event, and that was when I learned the buy the rumor, sell the news thing, because I was waiting for the Litecoin price to pop when this event happened, and the event happened and it immediately tanked. So apparently Litecoin is a good teacher of those kinds of lessons. Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Cardano. I know exactly what you're talking about because I was very excited. I was very excited to see that, and I don't know. I don't think we ever heard. As far as I know, we never heard what that was all about. Um, God, I can't even remember. I can't even remember the numbers, the prices where I was involved in. I wasn't involved. I was just holding Litecoin. I can't say I was involved in it, but um, thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. I would love it if the channel blew up so that it could be sustainable. I would love it because I would love to just be able to focus on this, and not have to not be on this sort of timer where I get timed out and I have to go back into the fiat mines. I would love it if this would blow up. I want a Cardano node CubeSat. That would be great. I would be very happy if we're talking about if Charles was at SpaceX talking about sending up a cube satellite. Something my understanding is that SpaceX is a very efficient way to put CubeSats up into near Earth orbit. And if that CubeSat was a validator, if it was a stake pool or something, or is validating the network in some way, I think that'd be fantastic. Charles wants to stick to his core principles, but keep people in the ecosystem until it matures. He has a huge concern for the developers who have been around for years. I agree 100%. Yeah, no, I think Charles is very patient and he's playing a long game. Like Charles, obviously I'm not privy to his finances, but we know him as a billionaire. And the problem with billionaires is that they get bored with stuff. And Charles, that has not been the case. Charles seems to care about his legacy. Like I say, hype man in chief for a good reason. Like even as, a billionaire, as we've been told he is. Again, I'm not saying he's a billionaire because I'm not privy to his finances, but for a guy like him to still be so passionate about Cardano after all these years, to be the hype man in chief after all these years, a lot of founders would have walked away. And we're lucky to have Charles because he definitely is playing the long game and definitely cares about the long term, success of Cardano, at least from my perspective. Yeah, I think this is why they hate us. I think this is why a lot of the rest of the crypto space hates us so much, because while they're sort of all getting down on the casino, casino festival party stuff, we're talking about very different topics. We probably seem like a bunch of snobs to them. We're talking about, this whole creating a level economic playing field for the whole world. They're not trying to hear that. They're just trying to hear that kind of talk. They want to talk about being meme coin degens and DeFi degens, and last cycle it was like PFP NFT degens, all that kind of stuff. And I get it because those are strong dopamine. Those are strong, dopamine elicitors. So I totally get it. But yeah, we're just on a different wavelength. I don't know anything about this one. What's happening with XRP being unlaced by end of year or their stablecoin coming to us? I have no idea. I don't think I know anything about that. People talk about it. In a recent interview, I'm not sure if it was on one of the financial shows. Charles mentioned that XRP doesn't have, a DeFi ecosystem. So I think it'd be great, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know how realistic it is even. Ooh, good question. Wade Robinson, how has it been for you to be a DRep? So as a DRep, it's been exactly what I expected. So I expected it to be pretty bloody and for people to be kind of coming for the DReps anytime they vote against something. And that's been the case because the most contentious votes have all been like some party wants money. And if you vote against them getting that money for any reason, they're going to come for you. That's how it works in governments generally. It's not a Cardano thing. That's how every government is. Like, if you vote against Lockheed getting a bunch of money via the DoD, Lockheed is not going to be happy with you, and they're very powerful. It's like in Cardano, we're just dealing with a bunch of other, we're just dealing with Cardano projects. So it's not anything like that or anything too sinister. But some of the projects have like, kind of I won't say it was the projects themselves, but I'll say the end result was them marshaling, their communities to kind of, say things to any DRep who was voting against them getting money, no matter what the reason was. It was really interesting though. Like when I would vote no on someone getting money, a million people would come out of the woodwork who had never like interacted with anything I had ever put out before. And, they would just be so angry, so angry, which is what I expected. But it was kind of funny because they would sort of like, sometimes they would kind of pose as, like, I've been watching your content forever and I can't, just say like the most terrible things. And it'd be, a username I had never in my life seen before. So, there was a little bit of that going on, but that's kind of exactly what I expect. It's like, it's a binary thing for those projects. They say they want, tens of millions of dollars worth of ADA. And, whether or not they win that vote or not literally means them getting tens of millions of dollars or not. And so for them, it's kind of like life or death. It's very binary. Either they get it or they don't. And even if, no matter what your rationale is, if you vote against them getting money, they will do anything. They will do anything to oppose you. You know what I mean? So it's exactly like governance everywhere. The whole game is third parties trying to get money. And when you oppose them getting the money, they're going to put as much pressure as they can on you in any way. But I'm kind of immune to that because I don't, you'll notice a lot of the DReps, a lot of the big DReps, in one way or another, they are asking for money themselves. So a lot of the big DReps, you'll notice they're tied to some kind of project of their own. And, they're asking for money, or they're going to be asking for money at some point in the future. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And you'll notice those DReps are the least likely to ever say no to anything, because they know if they say no to something, then all the people who want them to say yes to that are going to say no when they ask for money. So it's sort of this tragedy of the commons. There are all these DReps just voting yes on everything. And all of them are sort of taking their turn to reach their hand into the purse. It's like it's like a million pickpockets, and the pickpockets are the ones in the legislature voting on whether or not you should have stiffer laws against pickpocketing. Everybody's like, well, I'm going to go pickpocket on Tuesday, so I'm definitely voting not for stiffer laws on pickpocketing, right? It's like everybody's trying to reach into the purse and get their share of the money. So they're all just like, a lot of people, the people in that position, a lot of them are just voting yes on everything because they know if they vote no on anything, all the people on the receiving end of that vote are going to vote no when it's their turn. So a lot of that's going on. There are also a lot of DReps like me who have no connection to any project and are just voting their conscience, right? There's a lot like that. There's probably too many who are just voting yes on everything because they don't want to make anybody angry, because they know they're going to have their turn to reach in the purse as well. But there are a lot of DReps who are just voting their conscience on everything. And some of them are voting yes on everything because they really believe that that's the best course of action too. So I'm not trying to generalize everybody who votes yes on everything. Some people just believe that's the right course of action as well. But that's basically what's going on. It's the same old story. Governance Throughout history, governance has involved making decisions about who gets the money. As long as there was a tax base, there was money. And as long as there's money, there are third-party special interest groups who want that money. And a lot of non-corrupt governance is just being willing to say no, you know. And if you have some connection to a project in Cardano, it seems like that's a little bit harder because then you got to face those same parties voting no against you and you ask for money. So for me, it's a little bit easier because I'm not connected to any project. I'm not going to be asking for money. So I'm not going to have a turn reaching into the purse, thank God. So I can just vote my conscience on every vote. Seth says, I do think Charles is playing the long game. I do have hope for ADA. Not sure how the price performs, though, relative to some other projects. Doesn't make it inferior to a new shiny object. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how, I mean, the thing in crypto is it's not over till the fat lady sings. So, you know, this cycle is not over yet. Kai Pearson, I want to see computation storage for dApps that we can all use. ICP works like AWS, apparently. I wonder if they'll have that on Midnight. I'm a Cardano fan. I always figured they could smash ICP, laugh out loud. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm very curious to see what Midnight looks like when we're actually using it. Yeah, I'm curious. No, I don't think that's off topic, and we haven't talked about that particular thing. I'm very curious to see what it looks like also. See what it looks like when we're actually using it. But I think that's about, so we've been going for about an hour and 21 minutes. This was not a huge news day, but hopefully tomorrow there will be some good things to talk about. I hope everybody had a nice weekend. I think for a lot of people in the US, it was probably a 3-day weekend. So whether you just had a 3-day weekend or a normal weekend, I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you're looking forward to a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.